All right, so we are ready to begin our webinar on resume writing. The title of our webinar is Resumes That Score Interviews, because in all reality, what good is a resume if it doesn't get you to the interview? So today we'll be walking through components of a resume, how to construct your resume. We will keep the audience on mute for the presentation itself, and then we will have time for Q&A at the end of our webinar. So if you have questions that come up, hang on to those if you'd like to share them with everybody. You also are welcome to post your questions in our chat box during the webinar. And we have one of our resume writing gurus, career counselor with our team named Estella, who will be managing questions in the chat box throughout the webinar. So you can hear from Estella in the chat box during the webinar and also ask questions as a group at the end of the webinar. So without further ado, let's launch in to discuss resumes that score interviews. So our key topics today will include an overview of what is a resume, how to craft those key components of a resume, how to tailor your resume for individual job applications. That's a very important part we'll be emphasizing today. And just for an overarching frame of reference, our focus today will be on traditional resumes used for the civilian job market. So if you're tailoring a resume or crafting resumes for federal or government jobs, there would be some components that would be done a little bit differently than a traditional resume. And so we won't be diving into federal or government resumes today, but if you have questions related to that, we'll be able to cover that in a future webinar and potentially send you some resources in the meantime. But looking at traditional resumes, let's think about what is a resume. It really is a screening device. It's a mechanism for you to be noticed by an employer in relationship to a specific internship or job opening that you are qualified for, so that they can see an overview of your skill set and qualifications on paper before potentially speaking with you in an interview. So the resume really is used to get the recruiter's attention so that they see you as a top candidate among that pool of applicants who may be going for the same job, and you'll be enticing them with your resume to want to speak with you further in an interview. So all that being said, a resume is not a full biography of your life. It's very carefully crafted. So it does include components from your lifetime of experience, your relevant skill sets and such, but it is carefully crafted to share with them the most important information about yourself in relationship to the job that you're applying for. And as such, there's no single resume that functions as a silver bullet. Wouldn't we all love it if that were the case? Write one resume and be done. That's just not the case though. It is really important to tailor your resume for every job and thus create a unique silver bullet for each position that you may be positioning yourself for as a candidate. So let's dive into how we go about doing that. The first step is to include all of the most important information within the sections shown here. So you would, of course, include an overview of your relevant skill set, share information about your education, certifications, specialized training in relationship to the position that you're going for. Also feature accomplishments, awards, accolades, things that help you to stand out among other candidates who are going for the same job. And of course, a review of your experience, what work you've done, either in a paid internship or volunteer capacity, where you've been able to apply your skill set within the functions of the job that you're applying for. When we're thinking about crafting a resume from an overview perspective like this, we always encourage folks to use a blank Word document and create your own formatting. Avoid those templates that you can find online. There's thousands of them. If you go on Google, you'll quickly access many, many templates to choose from. But templates really can be quite constrictive and don't necessarily help you showcase your strengths and experience in a way that entices the employer to want to call you for an interview. Templates often have block sections where you put specific types of information, and those block sections become pretty tedious to edit in regard to changing the font size, the size of the block itself in relationship to other sections within the resume. And so you actually, while it may feel like you're saving yourself some time using a template, when I'm working with folks and writing resumes, I find that they typically invest a lot more time overall into fixing and refining that resume in a template format than when they just start from scratch, have a blank Word document, and build in their own formatting as they go. At the end of this webinar, we will be sending resume samples where you can see some really simple formatting guidelines that really anybody can do in Word or a word processing software so that you can have a nice, clean, polished resume without having to fuss with all the templates. All right, so let's talk about the first section. We'll walk through the sections of a resume one by one right now. So we always start with the header, which of course includes your name, your contact information, where you're located, and your branded title, which is the headline. So this part is really, it's simple, but it's also a very important part to feature at the top of your first page of your resume. By including your name in a larger, bolder font, along with your headline in a larger, bolder font, you are thus creating a branding association between that headline and yourself. So the reader, the employer, is immediately making an association between you. So as we're looking at the sample headline, we're looking at Margaret Thatcher, Project and Process Improvement Manager. That immediately focuses that employer's attention on Margaret as a project and process improvement manager and keeps them in that frame of reference as they're looking through all the rest of the resume. So the branded headline really is quite essential and is a piece of the resume that you would tailor for every application, because Margaret Thatcher might be a highly skilled project manager and applying for multiple jobs with that kind of title. She may also have skill sets that allow her to do business analysis or operations management or other related functions where maybe this particular headline might not properly frame the employer's reference for another application. So do tailor the headline. It can be just pulled directly from the title of the job you're applying for, or it could be functionally similar. So with this kind of resume, Margaret could apply for project manager or process improvement manager or other titles that might be unique to an organization where the functionality really is project or process improvement management. So keep those things in mind as you are crafting the headline for your resumes. The next part that follows is the career profile. So keep in mind as we're walking through these sections, we're going to look at them one by one, and then we'll look at them combined as a total document at the end so you can see how they all fit together. But within the career profile, you're further branding yourself with a profile statement. This is a brief but very robust summary of the key capabilities that you want that employer to know about what qualifies you for the position that you're applying for. So this again is a piece of the resume that you're going to tailor for every single job that you apply for. It is written in a narrative context. It doesn't have to be hugely long. It'd be as short as 3 lines. It could be as long as this one, which is about 7 lines. I wouldn't recommend going much longer than this. This is a longer example for somebody who has more years of experience. We can see here within the sample profile power statement that this individual has over 15 years of experience. So the more experience you have that's relevant to a job, probably the more information you'll need to include in your profile power statement. If you're new to a job market, if you're a career changer or just launching, having just graduated from school, your profile statement might be shorter. Essentially though, you want to use keywords from the job description to describe your own capabilities. So when you're looking at a job listing and thinking to yourself, I could do that job, that sounds exciting, I really want to work for that company and fulfill that function. Take the keywords from that job listing and then use them to describe the skills that you possess. That helps the employer to quickly make that association between yourself as a well-qualified candidate for the job because you're speaking to them in their language. That's something that we'll hit on as we talk through the rest of the document or the resume writing process. But using the employer's language, using keywords is really essential. We will also share a profile guide on this section specifically as follow-up to this webinar so that you'll have a variety of examples to draw from and some different formats you might think about utilizing to showcase your key strengths within your power statement. All right, the skills section immediately follows the power statement. We'll show a couple of examples on the slide after this, but first thinking about just kind of the concept of the skills section. You want to list the skills that you are most in mastery of. So think about, what am I a guru at? What skills am I really excellent and a subject matter expert in? Those are the skills you want to put in that section. Of course, also thinking about only including skills that are relevant to the job that you're applying for. So this section you'll also tailor for every job application. And so you might have, a very long list of your total skill set in a master resume, but you would pick and choose the ones that align most specifically with the job that you're applying for to include in a resume that you submit for an application. Again, using the employer's keywords, so use their language, highlight those keywords within the job listing, and use that to describe your own skills within this section. You want to use a consistent structure. There's a variety of ways you can do this, and again, we'll have some examples. And if you're brainstorming, if you're not quite sure what your key skills are, a good way to start that brainstorming process is to finish the statement, I excel at blank, and just come up with as many blanks as you can when you're thinking about, I excel at this or that. That will help you to pull that comprehensive list of all of your skills and then be able to draw from that as you're crafting tailored resumes. Another brainstorming technique, if you're at a loss and not quite sure what key skills you want to feature, would be to ask former or current coworkers, supervisors, friends and family, say, hey, what do you see me as super skilled at? And you'll probably get a longer list than what you know what to do with, because other folks will be probably very likely to compliment you and help you showcase those strengths. So thinking about all that, here's an example of two different formats for a skills section. The first one, of course, is pretty robust. It has a lot of skills and keywords packed in a very small space. That's okay for this part of a resume because, again, it's following your power statement and it's giving just pointed individual items that call out specific capabilities. They're keyword optimized, so they're drawn from the job listing that this particular sample was targeted for. And so the functionality of that is twofold. One, it again helps the employer to quickly associate your skills with yourself and being a top candidate for the job. And two, it helps your paper resume to be effective in getting through the digital first screening before your resume reaches the eyes and hands of a human. In most application processes, certainly for large corporations and very often for even small and mid-sized businesses, most applications are submitted online. Those online systems are called applicant tracking systems, or ATS. And the ATS system is designed to keyword scan every resume that comes through and then sort them in ranking of those that most align, have the greatest level of match to the job listing from top to bottom. So keyword optimizing your skills section helps you to get through the ATS screening so that your resume does get to the eyes and hands of a human, where then they can be even more impressed with your skill set and ready to give you a call to schedule that interview. So the first sample, of course, is quite robust. The second sample is a little more brief and maybe more appropriate for an entry-level candidate or a career changer who maybe has a newer skill set that they're gearing towards a new career direction. So there's no black and white, right or wrong. We always recommend going with a format that best showcases your strengths for whatever stage in career you're at. So just some things to consider as you are thinking about crafting your own tailored resume. Following the skills section, if you're a recent grad, you likely would follow it immediately with your education. If you're an experienced professional, you might swap that out and have your experience follow your skills with your education below. Again, there's no black and white. You can go with this in whatever format would best showcase your individual skill set. But thinking about the education section in itself, you of course want to include not only any degrees you've attained, but also certifications, licenses, or specialized training that would logically fit within an education section. If you have more than just education to include, you'll want to list your degree programs first. So always go in reverse chronological order, citing at the top the degree that you've most recently attained or you're currently enrolled in if you're in the process of completing that. And then go down backwards in time, going through the degrees that may precede the one that is most recent. You'll always want to include some basic information, including the college, university, or institution that you attended, of course, the title of the degree that you completed, the year that you graduated, or the year that you anticipate graduating if you are in process. If you're not sure about when you might graduate, it's okay to just throw an estimate out there since you're putting a year. If it ends up being a little sooner or a little later than that estimate, it's okay because you'll probably be in the job you're applying for using this great resume and then wrapping up that degree. And the main thing the employer wants to know is that you're in process, that it's not quite attained yet, but you're on the way. So after your degrees, then you can go through your certifications, licenses, or specialized training. When thinking about other non-education items to include here, if you have a variety of certificates or licenses, again, think about what is most relevant for the employer to know for that job that you're applying for. If you have, say, a real estate license and you can sell residential or commercial real estate, but you're applying for a job as an operations manager, you may not want to put your real estate license notation in your resume because it may not actually impact the employer's decision in seeing you as a highly qualified candidate for an operations manager role. However, if in that operations manager role, part of the function of the job is to evaluate or purchase properties for the corporation, then of course you'd want to include the real estate license that you hold on your resume. So again, no black and white. Think about what information is most important for the employer to know as you're marketing yourself in your resume for a specific job application. Here's an example of an education section. It can be quite brief like this, really just listing the title of the degree, institution, and year. This example, of course, shows a degree and a certification. So you may have more items than this, again, going through that listing of priority degrees and then certifications, reverse chronological order, etc. But this would be an example. In the sample resumes that we'll share after this webinar, you'll see some additional ways that you can craft the education section to include more detail about the classes you took, GPA, and other details that, again, may be important for specific jobs that you're applying for. All right, experience. This is a fun section to talk about because it's usually the biggest section on your resume and certainly one of the most important as you're marketing yourself for a job. You would always want to include the key components that are shown here on the screen. Just as with your education, your experience should always be shown in reverse chronological order starting with your current or most recent job and then going back in time from there as you go down the page. We will talk a little bit about volunteer work or community service, which can be included in another section. So when we're talking about experience, we're primarily talking about paid, relevant experience, or even an unpaid internship that's most relevant to the industry and function of the role that you're applying for. One of the first things you'll put in the experience section for any item is the title. We note here specifically functional job title, just because there are some organizations that may have a designated title for a role that doesn't necessarily describe the function of that role. And as you're applying for other jobs, you may find that the title could be a little bit of an inhibitor or deterrent in the employer's perception of your skill set when they're evaluating you for different jobs that might have a similar function, but a different kind of title. So an example of this would be in one of my previous roles, I was a director of business development. And in that role, the business that I developed was in cultivating university and corporate partnerships, where we weren't really selling anything as far as developing business, but we were developing channels for students and graduates to find internship and employment opportunities within the corporations that we partnered with. So there was development going on in the function of that role. However, business development as a term is often used in sales. And so I found quite often that I would receive a lot of calls from recruiters for sales jobs. And at first, it kind of confused me, and I thought, why am I being targeted for sales jobs? I have no experience in sales and really no desire to do sales myself. Just, it's not the right fit for me. Anyhow, I discovered that as I asked these recruiters, how did you find me? Why are you targeting me for this kind of prospecting? It was because of the title business development. And so I, of course, kept that title when I worked with that organization. But when I moved on from that organization, I've adjusted that title to note employer partnerships because that is more industry relevant and contextually accurate for the other kind of work, for the kind of work done in other institutions. So feel free, you can adjust your job title to be more functionally appropriate within your resume if it's helpful to better align you with the kind of jobs that you're going for. Besides the title, of course, you want to include company information that will include the name, the location, and the dates of your employment. You can include a short description of the company. At times that's helpful so that the future employer that you're applying to can better understand the kind of organization or context in which you are doing your work within a given role. The two samples that will send your resumes show one with descriptions and one without, so you can see how that might work. The most important part is, of course, the description of your responsibilities and your accomplishments. So these are two components within each item for your experience where first you'll describe what you did, of course, calling out the most important elements of your work that aligned with the kinds of jobs that you're going for. Again, here you can align your language with the employer's semantics by using keywords from the job listing and how you describe your own experience. Then the accomplishments follow, which is where you call out how you made an impact on the job. So as much as you can quantify those accomplishments, the better. If you can give numbers, percentages, timelines, budget detail, different things that give scope to what you accomplished, that the reader can quickly see what kind of impact you had through your work. Some examples of accomplishments that can be quantified might be percent of sales increased year over year, or number of clients served as increased year over year. It could be client satisfaction rates if you had feedback from your customers about the exceptional service that you provided. It could be revenue growth that you generated for an organization, or cost savings if you were able to more efficiently utilize the budget for your department, that's something that you can call out in quantified numbers. So for any role, I'm convinced there's something that can be quantified as you're thinking about how you showcase those accomplishments. So start to get your wheels turning in that regard when you're thinking about how you'll describe your impact for each job in your experience section. A couple of the details to keep in mind is to use action verbs. Always start out each sentence and each bullet point that you might use within the section with an action verb. Avoid use of pronouns. You're not speaking of yourself as I or my. You're using objective third-party perspective in how you're sharing about your experience. And you want to use a consistent tense. So you can list everything in past or present tense and how you describe your experience. And either way is fine. You just want to make sure, again, it's consistent for each item in the section. And you'll see some examples of that again in the sample resumes that we'll take a look at. Okay, here's an example of an experience item. This does include a description of the employer. So an import organization might import any variety of things. And so specifying that they're an international wine importer can be important to give context to the kind of work that was done. There's, of course, the dates of employment, the location, the job title. And then you see in a narrative paragraph context, the description of responsibilities, followed by a visual call out of the key achievements where each accomplishment is noted as a unique bullet point. And where possible, those accomplishments are quantified. In this case, a 25% quantified increase in sales for a specific market over a specific amount of time. There's also some notation of non-quantifiable accomplishment in regard to this person having served as a subject matter expert for different kinds of events. That's not really something you can necessarily quantify, but would be important for a future employer to know if they're going for, you know, higher level sales roles or management roles within the industry. And then, of course, calling out awards, recognitions, promotions, those sorts of things, as is shown in the third bullet point here, is another great way to showcase your accomplishments. Here's another example for experience. This is for somebody who may be a little bit less experienced. And so the volume of content shown for this job item is a little bit shorter, but you can see it's also still quite robust. For a customer service role, there is a nice overview of all of the areas of responsibility, followed by key accomplishments. So for any role, you can easily come up with that format where you're combining description of what you did with a call out of your impact through the achievements or accomplishments. Okay, lots of folks do community service, and that's wonderful. Our world needs it. We're all called to serve in different ways, and it can be possible that community service could be valuable to include on your resume. We have a lot of corporations in the modern global economy that include philanthropy and a serving heart as part of their mission, vision, and values as a corporation. And so if you're applying to a corporation that does embody some kind of vision and values of service, then speaking to your own commitment and passion for service by showing your volunteer or community service work in your resume is a great way to show your cultural alignment as an individual with the vision and values of the corporation. If your volunteer work or community service isn't identical in function or industry or focus as a corporation you're applying to, that's okay. The service itself is what's important. Also, if you're a recent grad or a student who's still going through your education to prepare for a future career, then volunteer and community service work becomes even more important because you may have had limited time and opportunity to gain work experience or internship experience in your target profession, but you may have a variety of valuable skill sets and transferable skills that you can showcase through your volunteer work. So all that being said, it's perfectly appropriate to include community service and volunteer work in your resume. You don't have to either. So again, think about what's most important for the employer to know as they're considering you as a job candidate for the job that you're applying for. And if your volunteer work or community service feels relevant, then go ahead and include it. If not, don't worry about it. Let the employer's attention stay focused on other elements of your resume that may be more important for them to know about your experience. So if you do include volunteer work or community service, utilize the same format as you would for paid work experience, where you want to show your title or functional role within the organization. Of course, note the title of the organization itself, the location, your dates of involvement. And when you're thinking about how far back to go, maybe you've done 20 years of community service and you have a lot that's compiled, and you could include a variety of it. Focus on including that which is most recent or most consistent, continuous in whatever length of time you're looking at. So if you have things that you did, 15, 20 years ago, maybe that wouldn't be the best to include, but something more recent would be. When we're thinking about format, here's an example of community service or volunteer work. You can see this is just as robust as an experience item. And again, you don't necessarily have to do it this way, but we did choose this example to show, particularly for somebody who's a student or a recent grad, that you really can showcase your volunteer work or community service with as much value, emphasis, and relevance as paid experience. So the same format can be used. It can be long like this, just like experience. It can also be abbreviated, again, whatever is most important. It can include a description of your responsibilities, as well as key achievements. If there's accomplishments that showcase your impact and what you can do for an employer, go ahead and showcase it through your volunteer work as well. You can see even with accomplishments for volunteer service, there were items that could be quantified. So keep that in mind as you are evaluating to include volunteer work in your own resume. All right, so now that we've walked through the major sections one by one, let's look at a one-page resume in full with all of these sections combined. The sample resumes that you'll receive as follow-up to this webinar are more than one page. So we also wanted to provide that lens so that you can see both a shorter one-page resume as well as what a resume may look like if it's more robust with multiple pages. But you can see here in this sample that there's a good balance of white space, even though all of those different sections that we just discussed are included. There's good visual balance between the quantity of text and then the blank space. The use of bold and underlined font is strategic so that the reader's eyes are drawn to specific pieces of information consistently across all the sections that are most important for the employer to look at. So when a recruiter or an employer is reading your resume, they're first going to scan over it really quickly with their eyes and then read pieces that stand out in more detail. So calling out visually items that you want them to notice in bold or underlined font is a strategic way to direct their attention to the items that you really want them to pay more attention to. One other element to this noted here as a call out is that there's a straight lined font or sans serif font utilized. Sans serif means it's a font that does not have the pretty little extensions and scrolls or I'm not sure exactly what they're called formally, but like Times New Roman has a little dot that kind of accentuates each point within the letter. A sans serif font eliminates all of those little pretty extras to the lettering, which gives a really clean appearance. It also helps you to fit more content in the text horizontally and vertically on the page. So it's easier to get that good balance of text and white space when you use a sans serif font. The most common one is Arial. That's a safe go-to for any resume. Tahoma and Verdana are two other sans serif fonts that are really clean, polished, and easy to fit in, lots of text cleanly without the extra space needed for the prettiness of the letters. All right, so now that we've looked at a summary, let's talk about a few other elements about resume writing in general. Always you want to be honest. You don't want to make up anything, because ultimately if you're hired for a position, you're going to have to then prove what you can do when you get on the job. So it doesn't do much good to state skills or experience that are embellished or inaccurate, because ultimately you'll be called to test to prove those things when you're on the job. So you do want to be honest and just be very, very thorough. If you're feeling like you may be not quite qualified for the kinds of jobs you want to go for, that may be a good time to talk with a career coach, a resume writer, a mentor, maybe a current or former supervisor who supports you in your career growth, and really think through your transferable skills and what is the exhaustive range of skills and experience you can draw from to market yourself for the kinds of jobs that you want to go for now. We're always striving, right? We're always looking at taking that next big step forward in our career. So there will always be a way that we're pushing ourselves beyond the boundaries of our existing capabilities. And that's okay to do when you're applying for a job. You just don't want to make up entirely the descriptions you're using for your skill set, your competencies, so that you're being honest in how you portray what you can do. Proofreading well is definitely essential. As we noted earlier in this webinar, most resumes are first screened digitally by an ATS or computer system before they reach the eyes and hands of a human. Because of that, spelling and grammar are even more critical now than ever, as the computer system itself can pick up on spelling and grammar errors and actually eliminate applicant resumes for that reason, pushing up to the top the resumes of folks who are highly qualified in match, as well as those who have the most accuracy in spelling and grammar. Plus, assuming that you get through the computerized screening, when a recruiter or an employer is reading your resume, you want them to see a really polished document that has excellent spelling, excellent grammar, so that they're very impressed by your written communication skills, as well as all the skills that you're listing on your resume. So a good strategy for proofreading is, of course, to review it several times, just reading it through as it is, but then read it backwards. Reading it backwards forces us to really focus on the spelling of each individual word. And if you're using a word processor like Microsoft Word and you run a spelling and grammar check, it's going to catch nearly all of the spelling and grammar errors. However, it will potentially miss words that are spelled correctly but cited incorrectly. So words that are easy to misspell include and. If you accidentally leave out the N, it becomes add, which is technically a correctly spelled word, and Word will not catch that in the spelling check. Also, the word to can be spelled a lot of different ways. You might mean it as the number two, or as I'm going to, or as the context of also, T-O-O. So if you mean one or the other, but you have it spelled in a different form of to, then it won't be caught in your spelling and grammar check. So reading the document backwards forces your eyes to really focus in on each individual word. Make sure that you have fully caught every spelling and grammatical element of your document before you submit it to submit it to the employer with your application. It never hurts to have one or two other people proofread your resume as well. If you're a student or alumni of Fresno Pacific University, you have a whole team of proofreaders at your disposal lifelong, because our career counseling team is here as a lifelong service for all Fresno Pacific students and alumni. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to us anytime if you would like some support with writing your resume, brainstorming elements for your resume, and certainly for proofreading. You have a team of proofreaders ready to go at your fingertips anytime. If you're not a student at Fresno Pacific University, there's lots of other resources you can use. Even asking friends and family members, maybe those who are particularly skilled in language, to proofread can be a great asset, just to get another set of eyes, and other folks will catch something when they're reading the document for the first time versus yourself if you've written it, you've probably read that resume through 25 times by the time you're done, and you might not catch things as easily as a fresh set of eyes. Another way to do a thorough proofread is to run your resume through JobScan or similar software. JobScan is an online platform that is free. There's a paid version, but the free version is accessible to anybody, and it works beautifully. It does actually do a spelling and grammar check, but most importantly, it does a keyword check where you can actually copy and paste your resume into one box within JobScan, and then copy and paste the job listing that you're applying for in a second box. And JobScan will actually run a comparative analysis and give you some quantified results in regard to how many times the keywords from the job listing show up in your resume. And in that way, it allows you to quickly optimize your resume further if you have keyword gaps, or if there are specific keywords that are highly emphasized in the listing, but only noted once or twice in your resume. It can help you to make some language adjustments to better align your keywords with the job listing. So it's a great tool. I actually don't ever recommend using the paid version because I've never seen a reason to. You're welcome to if you want to. JobScan is a great organization to support, but the free version also is highly effective and a great way to do that keyword check as you're proofreading your document. So after thorough proofreading, you're done, you're set to go, and you're ready to submit your resume for the job. So as we're thinking about resumes broadly, another question that comes up a lot, and you may have yourself, is what about the resume length? How many pages should my resume be? And historically, there has been a lot of emphasis on student and recent grad resumes always being restricted to a single page. A single page resume isn't bad, but I have seen lots of folks who actually leave out very important information about their skills and experience for the sake of keeping the length short. And when I speak with employers and recruiters, what I consistently hear from them is that they really don't mind looking at multiple page resumes. They're most concerned about having a good understanding of the applicant's skills and experience so they can make an accurate decision about whether or not that individual is a good fit to move forward in the recruitment process and invite for an interview. So if you're not quite sure what to do about the length of your resume, first think about what information within my resume is most important for this employer to know. If there's more than fits in a page, then look at some creative formatting that will help you to really craft a nice combination of first and second page so that the information is nicely spread across both pages without being too loose or too cramped. And again, in our resume samples that we'll send out as follow-up to this webinar, we'll have some multiple page resumes included so that you can see how that formatting can be adjusted to make a really pretty version of a multiple page resume. Some general guidelines, if you're entry level or career changer, 1 to 2 pages probably does suffice. If you're mid-level to senior level in your career, then you're probably gonna have a longer resume, and 2 to 3 pages could be completely appropriate. Typically after 3 pages, that's a good cutoff. You probably don't want to go beyond 3 pages. If you're applying for executive roles, vice president, CEO, that kind of level, 3 pages is perfectly appropriate. But if you're looking beyond 3 pages, then you want to start thinking about, am I really including information that's most important for this job? Or is there extra information here that might distract from the information that's most important for the employer to know? So again, that relevance and importance factor is where you want to find your balance point for the volume of the resume and the total number of pages that it ultimately would include. There's some more guidelines here that might be helpful as you're thinking about what to include or not to include on your resume and thinking about the resume length. All right, so that wraps up the information sharing piece of our webinar. We'd love to open up the format to our guests. So if you have questions, we can talk through the questions you may have or the pieces that are most relevant for you. So feel free to share your questions in the chat box, or feel free to unmute yourself. I'll enable speaking if you would like to speak your questions as well. All right, so I've unmuted everybody. If you want to keep yourself muted individually, feel free to do so, but now you all are able to speak if you would like to. And feel free to turn on your cameras as well if you'd like to share a visual while you speak. I see one question in the chat box. What is employer's semantics? So semantics basically means language. It's just a word I enjoy in speaking about language, but semantics refers to language. So keywords and semantics are really interchangeable. When talking about using the employer semantics, that's where we're talking about using the employer's keywords, the keywords that are noted in the listing for the job that you're applying for. Oh, another great question that states, what if you were military and have since retired and don't have the phone number or even remember the name or address for the former commands you served with? That's okay. That's actually an obstacle many folks encounter as they move on in their career and have items further in the past. Or if a company closes, you may not have current location or contact information to include. If that's the case, you don't necessarily need to include an employer's phone number or street address in a resume. The city and state of location really is all that you want to include with a job listing in your resume or experience item in your resume anyway. So if you remember the city and state in which you served, that's good to include. So the employer title, city and state, and then potentially the description, but again, that's optional. Would be the key information you want to have for every item within the experience section of your resume. Here's.
Hi.
So
Okay.
I'm sorry. So I'm the one that sent the question in about the military, and you answered it perfectly. But the one concern I have is like, I mean, I was stationed on the ship, well, actually submarine, but it was stationed in Bangor, Washington. But the main thing, our address always says FPO San Francisco, which means Fleet Post Office. So when I put it in an employer's application, what do I do as far as that is concerned? I mean, and then we travel and home ported other places, but we still use the same FBO. So putting the city and state might not work for me as far as like, because that same submarine was reassigned not just to Bangor and went to San Diego. So the same command, but in a different state. So that's where my confusion comes in.
Okay, yeah, that does have a little bit more complicated context than maybe a lot of traditional jobs. When you're thinking about a resume, though, I'm assuming you're targeting, with this question, you're targeting civilian employment versus federal or military employment as you're moving forward. Is that accurate?
Both, actually.
Both, okay. For the civilian context, I would recommend thinking more so about what would give the most accurate representation of the area you served versus the exact location of where you were based out of. Since your base changed and you also were deployed in different areas and your location changed probably fairly frequently, you could state something more generally, like based on the West Coast of the United States, or based out of Washington, Seattle, Washington, if that was where you were for the majority of those different timeframes. So the FPO certainly would be within the military context, you know, where your key hub was for mailing and for other different official purposes. But for sharing about your work, which is what you're doing in your resume, and giving context to the scope of what you did within that role, sharing your region more broadly would be perfectly appropriate. Many civilian employers are not going to be familiar with military terminology or locations of bases. And they certainly won't know anything about the frequency and locations of your deployments until they get a chance to speak with you too. So stating something a little bit more broadly would be appropriate. And then if you felt like it was relevant, that might be something you could share more information about in an interview when they're asking about that experience. If there was some geographic nuances or elements to your experience that would be helpful to share about being based in different places and deployed to different places, then that's something you can elaborate on in an interview conversation. But it would probably take up a lot of room to try and convey all that in the resume. So I'm not sure I can give you a black and white answer there, but those would be some of the things I would suggest thinking about as you're considering how can I best showcase what the employer needs to know about my experience as they're considering me for a future role.
Okay, thank you. And I won't take up much more time. I know there's probably other questions, but is there going to be a future one where it specifically deals with federal resumes?
We are planning that. Yeah, I'm not sure how soon in the future we'll have that, but we will. Here, I'll show here on our next screen. We will be posting all of our webinar announcements on our Instagram account, which is shown here. So you're welcome to follow us there. And that way, when we do have one posted, check it out. Also at the bottom of the screen, we have our website URL noted. Even though we're affiliated through Fresno Pacific University, all of our career development resources are open to the public and accessible to the public through our website. So we actually do have some federal resume writing tools and resources on our website, and that might be a good place to start as you're crafting federal specific resumes, because there are some differences that we wouldn't be able to go into today. And so that might be a good start, and then keep an eye out for our future webinars. Again, I don't have a date scheduled yet, but we will have one on that topic coming up.
All right, thank you. And I actually start Fred Pacific in July.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for joining us today. Thanks for sharing your questions. And you have our contact information as well. If you have other questions that pop up, feel free to reach out.
Hi.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much for this presentation. And I would like to know how to access this presentation first. And I would like to suggest for everybody, what I used to do is just to make or to write a portfolio for everything I did during my life, okay? Just skills or achievement in a Word document. And after that, when I have to write my resume, okay, I just use this document. It is easier, it is helpful. My question is that because the resume is the first step to get the job, and the second step is the interview. Mm-hmm. How can we make a balance between the information to put in the CV or the resume and the information to keep for the interview?
Yeah, that balance can be tricky. And great suggestion. I'm so glad you noted that about having a comprehensive portfolio of all of your experience to draw from as you're writing tailored resumes. That's an excellent strategy, and we didn't go into portfolios today for sake of time, but an excellent recommendation for everybody. So in striking that balance, you do want to probably think most prominently about two factors. One is what is most important for the employer to know to get you through that first screening. Knowing that your resume or CV will first go through probably a digital screening. You do want to make sure the document is keyword optimized, that you have alignment with the employer's language and how you're describing each various section within the resume, and that there's enough detail that shows some of the depth and scope of your skill set and your experience and accomplishments through your work, without necessarily being too much that you're giving, the whole biography within the written document. So there is a balance point where you probably will hit, an override where maybe you're including too much information in the resume that just becomes exhaustive versus having some information that you can then follow up on and elaborate on in an interview. So a piece we weren't able to get into today in this webinar, but is a strategy that we recommend for students who are job searching, is to think about your resume as the foundation of talking points for the interview. And that might be helpful as you're thinking about, where do I strike that balance point? as you're crafting your resume, if you keep in mind that for every skill item you list and for every element of your responsibilities and your accomplishments that you list in your experience, to have a story ready to elaborate on and share more about how you applied that skill or the context in how you did the work or achieved an accomplishment with the employer in an interview. That will help to kind of pare down the language within the written document itself, but have a frame of reference for yourself so that when you get to the interview, you can use that resume as the foundation and be helping the employer to circle back to it as you're telling stories and sharing more information about what you did. So using the resume as your foundation of talking points would be my suggestion of strategy in striking that balance.
Thank you. What about, to access the presentation, please?
Oh yeah, great question. I'll actually send an email out to everybody who registered that will include a copy of the slides that we reviewed, those sample resumes that I noted, the profile guide for writing your own power statement, and a general resume guide as well that just breaks down each of the sections like we looked at within this webinar. So that will come as email follow-up probably later today, maybe tomorrow morning at the latest.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Rose, and this is Stella. There is a question that came up in the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is, should we write both responsibilities and achievements in bullet points with job description keywords in order to make the resumes ATS compliant?
Yes, you can do that. That's a great question. Thanks for calling that one out, Estella. Yeah, you do want to keyword optimize the description of your responsibilities as well as how you share your accomplishments within your resume. Here's the caveat, as long as it's accurate. So you don't want to replace the language of what you did so much that you're writing something different than what you did. I hope that makes sense. If you're finding that you're having to then rewrite and stretch or change your description of your responsibilities or accomplishments significantly in order to make them keyword aligned, then you want to first go back to making sure that what you include in your resume is accurate. But as long as it's accurate, then yes, using the employer's language or keywords in how you write about your responsibilities and your accomplishments is the key strategy you want to go for. All right. Well, if there are other questions, feel free to chime in on your mic or type them in the chat box. As noted earlier, as follow-up, we will be sending out this presentation with the resources as follow-up by email, so keep an eye out for that. We also hope that you'll follow us on Instagram, since that's where we're able to advertise and promote all of the different topics and webinars that we host. And then check out our website, as we have a huge set of resources there that you are welcome to access at any time. They're open for Fresno Pacific students and alumni, as well as for the general public. So feel free to take advantage of all that. All right, well, I don't see other questions coming in, and we are at the end of our hour, so we'll go ahead and wrap up here. Thanks again for joining us. We hope that you've enjoyed your time with us together. We appreciate you sharing your time with us, and we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully at a future webinar as well. So take care, have a blessed day.